A pleasure to meet all at last, and now, here we are, again, with the Vlog-A-Thon 5.0, completely underway, and hopefully, I can get as much done as possible. Every time there's a new outfit on me, there's basically the likelihood that I have a bunch of this stuff ongoing through production and eventually into the processes of rendering and uploading. So of course, what I've come here to talk about today is basically about the Vlog-A-Thon itself. Yeah, I've been wanting to talk about how this series has run so far and how I ultimately feel about this. Compared to how bad the likes of Survival of No Limits and Multiple Wheels of Steel have ultimately panned out, one was just an idea that was just very stale and never quite worked very well for me, and the other had some nice intentions, had some great ways to make it probably comparable to the likes of South Kyle 04 and Doug DeMuro, but over time it just never quite measured up well. So ultimately it has run dry, and by the end of 2022 it'll probably be no more, just like with the latter. So now is where I come to talk a bit about the Vlog-A-Thon itself. 5 seasons, well, including this one of course. After all, when I first came up with this as far back as mid to late 2018, the idea of having a lot to say in front of the camera while still being able to separate them all into different videos to avoid getting off track too much, or possibly to avoid shifting contexts around. I'd say the Vlog-A-Thon itself was a unique idea in allowing me to delve into the idea of thousands of different things that I could say to the camera, or many to a lot of you. If you are in fact watching this series alone, all on its own, and probably nothing else on the channel, then I do suggest that you check out everything else. You're probably going to miss out on a good majority of stuff by this point. Nerf Secrets Revealed, Hot Wheels Celerity, HJN, GWK, and the likes of many other things. Of course, with films I should have talked about years ago, and I found it first. Maybe I'll talk about that in its own video at some point, but anyways, this series alone has grown to be really big. As I've mentioned before, this part of the Vlog-A-Thon, part 5 as I refer to this, will in fact include a grand total of 82 vlogs into a period of 8 days between November 18th through the 25th. Unlike with the other 4 seasons, I probably will call them seasons or parts or chronicles even. I don't really care at this point what I call them. It's technically just a domain of its own kind, as opposed to every other part of the channel I've actually made so far. But no matter what it is though, the Vlog-A-Thon sure has been a nice marathon of subjects and topics that I could ever possibly talk about. And I'm more than glad that I do have the opportunity to be able to have a lot to say to people, because at times like this, nearly 2 years ago, we were definitely in a huge part of our lives that was beyond important. It was an ordeal that was so unbelievable. It was unlike anything we'd ever possibly seen. Unless, of course, you really want to start talking about how there was a pandemic almost a year before then. And then, of course, with the likes of the politics that erupted throughout the mid to late 2010s, or even with the likes of many other things. The recession of 2008, stock market crash of 2002, and 2001, terrorist attacks that killed nearly 3,000 people. You could look at it every possible way, but it seems that every single year has its own distinct event that really shows the true tone of how each year had gone for us. Every single year it seems humanity is bound to go through something really big. And here with this year, we have a combination of things. We got a war going on in Ukraine. We got undeniable economic changes brought upon us. We have threats of a supposed famine happening. We got the possibility of more pandemics happening after we had just cleared ourselves from the last one that happened nearly 3 years after it had already begun. Like, really? When's that part ever going to end? On top of that, we're also having to deal with other natural, inevitable parts of life itself, like celebrity deaths. I mean, really. Ivan Reitman, Queen Elizabeth II, Gilbert Gottfried. Man, we're just losing people left and right this year. A lot of good people. It was nothing like what happened last year, though. I mean, the likes of people like Biz Markie, Eric Carle, Ed Asner, Michael Angelis, man, Sean Connery even. Like, why? Why do we ever have to live in such a period like this? A period in our lives that is going to be more than just some simple ordeal. But I do feel that maybe someday we can all just step back and learn from some mistakes that we might have made back then, and then eventually just look forward. As I've said though, the Vlog-A-Thon is what it is. It's gotten much bigger over time, and it has allowed for me to really have a lot to say to people of all sorts. I feel better about myself, more confident about myself, and now I'd say the next installment should be about I Found It First. So stay tuned for that point. Coming soon here on the channel.